Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to tell you about what I read in March 2022. It was an interesting month. And by interesting, I mean that there were far more disappointments this month than really anything else. But don't worry, I'll talk about all of that as we go along. So I'm going to start off by discussing fiction, all the fiction books that I read. And more specifically, I want to start off by talking about this pair of novels that I read during March that kind of randomly matched up rather nicely. I love when that happens, completely by coincidence. But the first of that pair is a book that I picked up completely on a whim. I saw it was available through my library, so I decided to pick it up. It's called One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. In this book, we follow a young woman named Katie, and right at the beginning of the book, we learn that she's just lost her mother. The two of them were extremely close, and actually when her mother was sick, the two of them were planning this dream Italian vacation together. Well, after her mother's death, Katie decides she's still going to go on this vacation, but she's going to go on it completely solo. She needs some time to herself. She wants to just focus on grieving, and she also wants to make some choices about her life. Mainly, she wants to figure out if she actually wants to stay in the marriage that she's in. Well, when she's in Italy, she runs into someone very unexpected, and it makes a lot of things about her mother's past a whole lot clearer. And then I read Surrender Dorothy by Meg Wolitzer. This is a book from her backlist. I've been trying to read through all the books in Meg Wolitzer's backlist. This one she released in the late 90s, and similarly to One Italian Summer, this one is also about a mother-daughter pair who were really close, but one of them has to deal with the loss of the other, except in the case of this book, it's the mother losing her daughter. This young daughter, her name is Sarah. She's 30, and she always takes this summer house with her friends at the end of summer. They always spend a month there together. Right at the beginning of the vacation this year, she very unexpectedly, very tragically dies in an accident. And so then later on, her mother comes to stay in this summer house. Essentially, she takes her daughter's place in the summer house, and then we follow this group of people throughout the rest of this summer, seeing how they're all coping with this loss. One Italian Summer I actually listened to on audiobook, and I chose that format because I saw that Lauren Graham, aka Lorelai Gilmore from Gilmore Girls, was chosen to be the narrator. And as much as I love her, I can tell you that I thought she did just okay as the narrator of this book. I mean, it's nice to hear her voice, but her performance just did not blow me away. I know why she was chosen, because people like me who love Gilmore Girls would find that to be a draw, and it worked on me. I was baited. But just in case you're also a fan of Gilmore Girls, you find that fact to be enticing, I just wanted to give you a heads up that it's not the greatest audiobook experience. If I could go back, I would just read the ebook. But I can tell you that this was a really fun, relaxing, summery read, as you would expect from the title. It was nice to spend time with this book, even though it did deal with the heavy topic of grief. And I think the exact same thing could be said of Surrender Dorothy, because it deals with grief, but it's also surprisingly relaxing and just kind of nice to spend time with. I don't think this is the best book in Meg Wolitzer's backlist. Now that I've read more and more of them, I'm actually getting close to being done reading all of her books. But I liked it. I could tell she was getting stronger as a writer by this point in her career. This was her 5th novel. So I could definitely feel her getting closer to what she would later do in The Interestings, which is one of my favorite novels. I think it is her masterpiece. I think the plot of this one could be a little bit more well-balanced. I think she could have fleshed certain things out more and held back on other things. And I'm not convinced all the characters needed to be there. There's one character in particular who I found kind of unnecessary to the story at large. But other than that, I did enjoy reading this one. I read it all in one day, if that tells you anything. But I'm glad I read both of these books, but I'm extra glad that I read them in the same month because they were such interesting mirror images of one another. But then also in March, I read the very last Lily King novel that I had yet to read. That was her 2nd novel called The English Teacher. In this book, we follow an English teacher at the high school level. She's also a single mother. She teaches English at her son's prep school. And right right at the start of the novel, we see her agreeing to marry a man that she's just been casually dating. It seems like that proposal comes out of nowhere, and surprisingly, she says yes. So they get married and they create this blended family. There's her and her new husband, his kids, and also her son. And while her son is really excited to be a part of this new family, it's a very big change for Vida, who is the English teacher, the single mother, and a lot of her repressed trauma comes to the surface. Like I said in the author spotlight I did on Lily King at the end of March, this being her second novel, I thought it was an improvement upon her debut. I thought there was more nuance in here, but there's also a lot more anger in this book than there is in really any of the rest of her books. Now that I've read them all, this is probably the angriest book. This main character, Vida, has a lot of repressed rage, and that comes out in very indirect ways because she doesn't talk about what she went through, at least not through most of the book. So a lot of the anger she feels is directed at Tess from Tess of the D'Urbervilles, because that's the novel she's teaching to her high school English class. So if you haven't read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, you're looking to read it for the first time or reread it, you want to tie it to a contemporary novel, this would make a good pairing. Just make sure you read Tess of the D'Urbervilles first, because this book will definitely spoil it for you. But there are so many references to Tess of the D'Urbervilles in here. I could see them being a really good pairing. But if you want to hear a little bit more about this book, any of her other books, where I recommend you start with her if you've never read any of her novels before, I will be sure to link that author spotlight in the description box below, and I'll put it up in the cards as well. And then I read the first book in the Veronica Speedwell series, which is called A Curious Beginning by Deanna Rayburn. Read this one for March Mystery Madness. In this book, we follow a young woman, Veronica Speedwell, who enjoys studying butterflies, which sounds innocent enough. But then, strangely, at the start of the book, she's the target of an abduction attempt. So then a little bit later on, she goes on the run with this very grumpy naturalist, and they try to figure out who might be after her and why. Right from the start of this book, I found Veronica's character to be a lot. Like, not just a spitfire. I know a lot of these types of novels have a very fiery female main character, but Veronica is mouthy enough for it to cross over into the territory of being rude, which I don't find cute or funny. I just find to be obnoxious. I didn't hate this book. I really liked the plot. It kept pulling me along even as I was finding Veronica to be very grating. But what I did really, really like about this book was that grumpy naturalist I was talking about. Stoker is his name. I love him. I thought he was such an awesome character. I'm almost tempted to pick up the next book in the series because I want more time with him, but I'm just not convinced I can or should go on with a series if I find the main character that irritating. But I'm not going to make any decisions now. I'll decide later on, but generally this was kind of middle of the road. All those different factors balance themselves out to a 3-star rating. The classic book that I picked out for myself this month was The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain, which I did end up reading. This is the classic story of two young boys who swap places. And in typical Mark Twain fashion, I found this to be very fun and very amusing, but I actually thought it would probably have made an equally as effective short story. I wish this had been shorter, basically. But if you'd like to hear me speak a little bit more about this story and the adaptation in the 90s PBS Kids TV show Wishbone, I will link my latest installment of my series here on this channel called What's the Story Wishbone. I'll link that for you in the description box below and up in the cards in case you'd like to hear more about it, or in case you would like to see an adorable Jack Russell Terrier in a variety of period costumes. Now, before I start talking about my DNFs and my 1-star reads, I want to tell you about the one written review of mine that appeared during the month of March. I wrote a review of Laser Writer 2 by Tamara Shopson for Harvard Review. And this is a short little novel that's set in the 1990s, and in it we follow a young woman who starts working at TechServe, the iconic New York City Macintosh repair shop. She starts working there. She meets other people who work there. This is definitely a very quirky little book, which normally is not my thing at all, but this book completely won me over. I enjoyed this so much. I will link my review for you in the description box below if you'd like to go give it a read. I actually had a ton of fun writing that review. I'm really proud of how it turned out, so it'll be down there if you'd like to hear more about this incredible little book. But now, let me tell you why I ended up DNFing not one, but 2 different books during the month of March, both of which I thought I was going to love, just to rub some extra salt into that wound. The first book I DNF'd in March was actually my other March Mystery Madness pick, and that book was called Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. In this book, we follow a woman who's come back to her hometown after a breakup. She's trying to help save her family's restaurant. But then early on in the book, a food critic, who also just so happens to be one of her ex-boyfriends, not her most recent one, but a different ex-boyfriend, he and his father eat at the family restaurant, and very soon afterward, that ex-boyfriend drops dead. Right after I started this book, I'm talking immediately, I didn't like the writing. I thought it was way too casual, just was not getting along with it, but I figured this is supposed to be fun, so I'm gonna suck it up, right? I'm here for a good time, I'm not here for a long time, so I can handle that in order to enjoy the plot. The plot has to be good, right? It wasn't, and it just kept getting worse as we went along. I mean, at one point something happened in here that frustrated me so much that I went and looked up the drug laws in the state of Illinois where this book is set, because what was happening felt so outlandish and it was really getting to me. And I figured if this book is making me feel compelled to go and read legalese, like legal language in state laws that aren't even my state, it's probably not a good sign. It's probably a sign that this book isn't for me. So I decided to put it down after that. And then I also gave Fencing with the King by Diana Abu Jaber the old college try. And I really wanted to like this one. I felt so sure I was going to like this one, and not just because the publisher was kind enough to send me this copy, which just makes me feel awful, but also because this book involves birds. It has a bird on the cover, which doesn't always mean that there are things relating to birds inside. I've been tricked so many times that way. But there's a scene with a falcon right at the start of this book. It involves falconry. And that still couldn't save this for me. I just found this story of a Jordanian American family going back to Jordan so that the father of the family can fence with the king during the king's birthday celebrations. I thought it was just so convoluted. There were too many character perspectives, bounced around in time. I just wasn't enjoying it. And since I wasn't being paid to review this one, I decided to bail on it, begrudgingly. Then there were 2 other books this month that, in retrospect, I probably should have DNF'd, but I didn't, and so both of the books ended up receiving a 1-star rating from me. And unfortunately, one of those 2 books was the book that I was probably the most excited to read during the month of March. It's just heartbreaking. That book was The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd. This book follows a woman who finds this weird highway gas station map amongst her dead father's belongings. And very quickly she starts to realize that, number 1, there's something strange about this map. And number 2, someone out there seems to be after it. And as she's starting to look more into the map and find out the secrets behind it, she learns more about both of her parents and the connections that they had to this map. I stuck with this book even as it was meandering without direction, ironically enough, because I didn't just have hope that I would love this book. I felt sure that I was going to love this book. I felt that every single page I turned brought me one step closer to that moment where I would just click with this book, where everything would make sense, where I would feel connected to the story and these characters, and I would start loving this in the way that I was anticipating I would love this. So you can imagine my confusion and my sadness when that moment never arrived. There was this whole weird secret history-esque backstory. I didn't feel like I could connect with that large cast of characters who was introduced because we didn't get to spend any time with them. We didn't get to learn anything about them besides the way they related to one another, which just made them very one-dimensional, very weak characters. And let me just say this without revealing more about the story. A twist is made a whole lot less effective if you have two of the same type of twist in one book. This got 1 star from me because I can tell you that I did not like a single thing about it. And the same thing went for the Department of Rare Books and Special Collections by Eva Yurchik. I got this book as part of a book exchange I did with the lovely Roxanne over at the Novel Sanctuary. She sent me this book, which is the strangely depressing tale of this woman who works in the rare books department at a university library, and she has to stand in as the director of the department when the existing director has a stroke, and part of what she has to do after she stands in is address this situation of these extremely rare books, this collection of rare books going missing. I spoke about this book at length in the vlog I did for the book exchange, and also in that exact same video, I also discussed the other book that Roxanne sent me as part of the exchange, which was this monster biography of Edith Wharton by Hermione Lee. This is a fantastic, in-depth look at Edith Wharton's life and her work. Some of those sections I did skip over a little bit, so I didn't spoil some of the novels I haven't yet read. But if you'd like to hear me talk more about this book or the previous book, I will link that vlog for you in the description box below and up in the cards. And since I had just read that Edith Wharton biography, it actually proved to be a really good motivator for me to go back and read her novel, The Reef, which I had put on my January TBR, and then I ran out of time to read it, so I finally went back and actually read it during the month of March. And this is essentially the extremely agonizing story of a love square that develops between 4 Americans living in France. One man at the beginning of the novel makes a very impulsive decision because he was feeling rejected at the time. And then throughout the rest of the book, he just kind of doesn't want to own up to it. He's forced to, but because of that early choice he made, no one gets what they want. It's a gorgeously written book, of course, because it's Edith Wharton, but it is very depressing. And it's not her strongest book. And based on what I read in that biography, it seems that she knew that. But now let's firmly pivot into nonfiction books. I'm going to talk about nonfiction books for the rest of this video. So the first one that I read during the month of March that I've been so excited to talk about, it's a book called Tell Me Everything by Erica Krauss. This is a memoir of a woman who worked as a private investigator for a law firm in the early 2000s, and she was looking into a Title IX case against a university. The law firm that the author was working for at this time was representing a client who had been sexually assaulted by football players at this university. And it seemed like a lot of people within the university knew that this took place, and they were allowing it because they wanted the football players to keep playing. So there were no consequences. And it was the law firm's belief that this was a part of a larger culture of sexual assault and sexual commodification surrounding this university's football program. The beginning of this book had me absolutely absorbed. This author talked about how she has a very recognizable face. And so it's a very common occurrence for her that complete strangers will approach her and eventually just start telling her all their secrets because she seems familiar, but then again, she's a stranger, so they feel more safe telling her their secrets than anyone else. It was just wild. That's actually how she got the PI job, and then we learn how she got good at being a private investigator and her tactics. Hearing about how she was figuring out how to do this job and how much seeking justice for these women meant to her personally, how much it connected to her own personal story, it was so moving. So it was completely riveting and it was really heartfelt. I thought it was perfect. But then I would say in the last third of the book, when she starts talking about her extremely complicated relationship with her mother, I felt like she lost control of the storytelling, probably because it was so personal. I watched a virtual author event with Erica Krause that I think cleared some things up for me on what went wrong in that last third of the book. I talked about it at length in the Goodreads review I wrote for this book. I spent a lot of time writing that, so I will link that for you down below if you want to read more about this. But basically, I thought this book was so nearly perfect. It just needed some minor edits in that last section to make everything feel more balanced. Had that happened, it would have been a 5-star read, but as it stands, it was more of a 4.5-star read. Even with the minor issues that I had, I still highly recommend this one. I also read another new nonfiction release during the month of March. It's a history book called After the Romanovs by Helen Rappaport, and this is about Russian exiles in Paris before, during, and after the Russian Revolution. Helen Rappaport looks at all different types of people who emigrated to Paris. So, of course, former royalty, but also revolutionaries, artists, regular people, and she talks about what their lives were like once they got to Paris. Who thrived? Who struggled? What kinds of jobs did people get? What kinds of communities did people develop, if any? I thought it was a very interesting, very thorough history. I think if you're going to go on to enjoy this one, you'll probably need to enjoy discussions of everyday life. But if that sounds interesting to you, you might like this one. And since we started out this wrap-up with a pairing, I thought it was only right to close it out with a different pairing. So in March, I read a book called The Feud by Alex Beam, which is about the friendship and mentorship between Vladimir Nabokov and Edmund Wilson that ended on extremely bad terms. And then I also read Artistic Rivalries by Sebastian Smee, which tells the stories of 4 different relationships between artists that combined friendship and competition. These rivalries that actually did a lot of good for the artists in some respects, driving them to be better, but that could also be extremely toxic as well. I made a video in which I discussed both of these books. I felt they made a good pairing because they both discuss very complex relationships between creatives. If you would like to hear more about one or both of these books, I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. So those were the books of March. It was a disappointing month, but hey, April's a new month and I am hoping for the best. All the books that I talked about in today's video, as well as all the other links that I promised you, will be in the description box below for your clicking convenience. If you have thoughts on any of those books, or if you have any more general comments or questions you would like to share with me, please feel free to leave those in the comment section below. I love hearing from you. And if you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now, you can find me on a variety of places around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, the 2 places where I'm the most active. The links to everywhere you can find me will be at the bottom of the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.